Hi, I'm Maria Theoharis of Velo Sews on social media. Welcome back to the Sober 50 podcast on Sew Organized Style. And it's the top 20 countdown. Grab a cuppa and relax with us.
Which their fabrics are very nice, but they are on the pricey side. People would say that they're good quality, but I'm making up what has become known as a wearable toile. That wasn't even a thing back in the day, but it is. It's just you made a first version. Didn't have a name. And I've got some nice fabric that I got from the famous man outside Sainsbury's in Walthamstow Market, and it's really nice fabric. He said it was wool. We had some wool, but it's very fine wool. And I don't disbelieve him because I've had some really lovely quality fabrics from him. I think he gets them from the factories and manufacturers in his area, and he's able to get top quality fabrics, which are obviously what they don't need in their workrooms.
That's Susan Young. She's the original blog writer for Sober 50. This was the second podcast with Susan in 2020, and today's episode is number 8 in the top 20 countdown. You'll find Susan on Instagram under Susan Young Sewing. Since 2020, there's been a decline in the bricks and mortar fabric shops available to us. However, finding fabric both in real life and online still has the same challenges, and Susan talks about those in this podcast. Susan is a sewing tutor at Backstitch shop and is a Pfaff UK ambassador. Thank you again, Susan, for being a great friend, for being part of the London Frocktail crew, for giving your time to Sober 50 and to Sew Organized Style podcast. Let's get started.
Hi Maria, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Yes, not too bad, still surviving, thankfully.
It's good to hear that things are picking up now.
Yeah, it feels like there's a bit of normality returning to the UK now, just gently. Not all countries, though. Wales and Scotland are still slightly more locked down than England, but people are starting to venture out again a bit more, which is good. It feels a bit more normal when you're out in the streets, although the shops aren't open yet, but I think they'll follow fairly soon. Let's keep our fingers crossed for that.
Very true. So today we're going to talk about your most recent blog post for Sober 50. It was all about buying fabric when it comes down to it.
That's right. It started off that Judith and Sandy were approached by a follower who asked whether anybody else had had the problem that she did, where she'd bought some fabric and she'd spent time making a beautiful garment with it that she was very happy with. And then after 2 or 3 goes through the wash, the fabric had turned into something really rubbishy, and it was so disappointing, and she didn't know whether it was, as so often is the case with sewing, was it something she'd done, well rarely is it, or was it the fabric in the first place? So that prompted the discussion on the Sew Over 50 feed of, is there any such thing as cheap fabric? Is it always rubbish? Or therefore, is it better to spend more money on fabric? Is expensive fabric always good? So there were a huge range of comments on the post, and cheap over expensive was just one of the points that came up. So I waded in early on because having been sewing for, since the age of 11, so that's 46 years, I think. It means that over that time, I've sewn with a massive number of different fabrics. And you can't quickly learn some of the things and some of the experiences that I have in that amount of time to know whether the fabric you have in your hand is a good fabric or not. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't.
And just so that our listeners understand, your sewing experience is more than just someone who sews for themselves.
That's right. So over the years, I have worked in bridal and evening wear was my specialist background. I worked for an evening wear company when I first left college. And then when my children were small, I worked for a small bridal company near where I live. And we used to use some beautiful fabrics there, not super high end, but nice fabrics. So I've worked with fabrics across the spectrum, really. So in my day-to-day sewing, back in the past, I didn't have a lot of money to spend on fabrics, so I had to choose wisely. there wasn't the amount of choice then, because home sewing, home dressmaking was really in the doldrums. After I left school, it started to be a subject that was not being taught properly any longer. I'm sure many people who are listening to this will identify with that. We had a good education in needlework, and the younger sewers who are coming along didn't necessarily. So unless they had somebody like their mum or their gran or an auntie to teach them, the newer sewers are coming at it with nothing really to base their choices on.
Yeah.
Other than the media that are feeding them images of beautiful fabrics, and they've got money to spend, so they want to spend it. They're being convinced that an expensive fabric, it may not be what it is appearing to be at times. And particularly with internet shopping, what is even more so at present, it's very difficult to tell whether the fabric you're buying is as good as it ought to be for the price. To my mind, if I'm spending about £20 a metre, I'm not sure what that would be in dollars, but £20 a metre is quite pricey.
It's around about $40 a metre here, I think.
Is it? So
yeah.
that would be pricey?
Yes.
I would expect that to be decent quality fabric, and that isn't always the case, I don't think. Yeah. I think you can get bargains. There are lots of ways of doing that. Just because they're cheap doesn't mean they're rubbish. This is such a difficult thing to try and explain to newer sewers, isn't it? Do you find yourself ever trying to?
I haven't had to really explain it, but my purchase preference are remnants, because that's where I can apply my understanding of what is a good quality fabric over one that isn't, especially when it's the last part of the roll. And because I'm short, I can get some value out of it. That's why I love remnants, and it's a challenge. However, the reason I wanted to make sure that our listeners understand your background is because you do have quite a depth of knowledge and understanding of what a good fabric is, what good fabric value you can find if you understand fabric, fibres, weave, and the things that manufacturers can put into fabric that can make it seem good quality, but after a couple of washes, like, we've already seen, it ends up looking like a thin dish rag, and that's not what you bought.
No, it isn't. They can be quite artful, and it's always been like this. This isn't a modern thing.
It's not new.
It's always been like this, that there will be manufacturers of fabric that are just cheap as chips. They will use a lot of dressing, sort of starch, or the dye itself will make it seem like a decent cloth with a bit of body to it. As I said in the blog post, after a couple of washes, that comes out and then it turns into a dish rag, and it's really not very good. Things that have got... So polyester cotton used to be about all you could get. We're talking about 15, 20 years ago, when home sewing was really in the doldrums. In my experience, and I can only talk from my experience, obviously, living in an area that doesn't have a textiles heritage, then I could only get what was in the shops locally. The reason I say about textiles heritage is because in the UK, there are areas up in the north, more specifically, where they had the cotton trade. There was a lot of woolen cloth produced, and also in Scotland, in the islands. I touched on this in the blog.
Yes.
So people in those areas had the mill shops and things that they could probably go to and get wonderful quality fabrics when the rest of us weren't able to. But you touched on buying remnants and mill shops and have bargains, because they've got the ends of rolls, they've got bolt ends, ends of lines.
Yeah.
All of those things you can get in those places, and they're probably going to be jolly good value. Now, that doesn't mean they're cheap, though. It just might mean they're cheaper.
Correct.
Than their original cost. So it depends what you want your textile, your fabric for, and then you have to weigh up whether that's a good price and you want to snap it up, or whether it's still a little bit pricey, but you know that it is such good value for what it is, that it's also worth having. So I can see you're wearing your beautiful Chanel French-style jacket there. And you can get some gorgeous tweed fabrics, like Linton Tweeds here in the UK, who make for Chanel, have done for decades.
Yeah.
And they make beautiful fabrics, and you can buy directly from them still. So you could make yourself your own jacket in a fabric that a Chanel jacket could also be made in. And they're not cheap. They're, I don't know, I'm guessing now, probably between 60 and 80 pounds a metre, maybe not as much as that directly.
Direct, because I've been looking at the Linton Tweed website.
Oh,
yes, they range from about £42 and as low as £18 a metre.
Okay, so that actually, I think that's very reasonable for the quality they're likely to be.
So the £18 ones, they've only usually got a couple. And then I'm speaking from my experience here in Australia. When I bought from them, they'll be here within 4 days.
Really?
Yes.
That's impressive.
I'm happy. I don't buy that often, but, they sit there.
No.
And then when we came to the UK, probably 6 years ago now or more, we actually went up to Carlisle and I bought a few pieces from the shop.
Gosh, I've never been, I must admit.
Yeah.
There was a period of time where I wasn't sewing, quite a long period of time where I wasn't sewing, so I wasn't going to places like that looking for fabric, whereas now it's become my big hobby is going out looking at fabric. And don't get me wrong, I don't always buy. Just because I go out, it's like almost a spectator sport to go out and just stroke fabric and see fabric. And I love to go with my friends, and I'm a terrible enabler. So if I go fabric shopping with friends, quite often they'll come home with more than me. But I find they like to pick my brains, and I'm about fabric, and I'm more than happy to do that. I just love looking at fabric, discussing fabric, and just sharing that interest, that hobby, that activity with my sewing friend, my new sewing friends.
Yeah.
Because most of them are younger than me.
We're all different ages, and it's good that we all can communicate about the same thing, which is fabric and sewing. So it's lovely. So, Susan, in your blog post, you brought up your general rule of thumb, and there were 3 points that you suggested people should think about when they're buying fabric.
Yes, these are the ones that I apply, and I think anybody else could as well. So the first one, and I think it's the most important one, is, do I like it? And so if you like it, then you're already halfway towards thinking I might buy it. But then I think the next one you really should consider is it fit for the purpose that I intend it to use it for? And this one is one of those areas where you start to learn what is appropriate for what you want to make with it. So you might pick something to make a jacket with, but then discover that it's just too thin, or it's the opposite, much too thick, or is it going to fray really badly? Or if I want a waterproof jacket, is this fabric waterproof? If it isn't, can I make it waterproof? There's a number of factors it's good to take into account. If you're just simply making a blouse or a top, then you probably don't need to consider these things. But if you're starting to get into the more experimental, to push yourself more with the techniques that you're learning, you will start to encounter. So if you're going to make yourself a jacket or a coat, there's very different techniques, or evening wear. There's very different criteria start to need to be applied to having a successful make at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that you shouldn't experiment, because you can. That's what designers do. They push the boundaries, but designers tend to do it within knowing what kind of result they're likely to get. Whereas a fairly inexperienced sewer might come at it thinking, oh, well, I'll just try this fabric for that. And then they work really hard and make what is technically a lovely garment, but actually is not fit to go out in. And then that's so upsetting when you spend so much time on it. So I really do urge you to consider what is fit for the purpose. Do some research, because again, it might come down to, well, how much do I spend per metre on the fabric required for this item? Let's say a jacket. Do you spend a lot of money on a beautiful Linton cloth, or do you have a look round and see if you could do it in something else? You could do it in a corduroy or a chino or something. To be honest, I'm making a jacket at the moment, and it's the first time I'm making this pattern, and I don't want to cut it straight away in the cloth that I bought, because I did invest in some lovely corduroy from Merchant and Mills.
which their fabrics are very nice, but they are on the pricey side. People would say that they're good quality, but I'm making up what has become known as a wearable toile. That wasn't even a thing back in the day, but
No.
it is now. It's just you made a first version. It didn't have a name. And I'd got some nice fabric that I got from the famous man outside Sainsbury's in Walthamstow Market, and it's really nice fabric. He said it was wool, had some wool, but it's very fine wool. And I don't disbelieve him, because I've had some really lovely quality fabrics from him. I think he gets them from the factories and manufacturers in his area, and he's able to get top quality fabrics, which are obviously what they don't need in their workrooms. So I've got this fabric which will look perfect, and it does have a nice amount of body, but it is very fine. So I've actually had to mount it onto something else. I'm backing it onto lining. I'll do a post about it eventually, so you'll get to see what I'm talking about. In other words, the first fabric I want to use is not entirely appropriate for the pattern. Yeah. But I have a technique in which I can give it more body. I can make it more suitable. And I'm hoping that it will turn into a successful garment. My final criteria is, do I really need it? So
that's my favourite.
So I don't know. In the end, only the individual can decide they really need it, because no, probably not. But want, that's another matter, isn't it?
Yeah.
That comes down to being the individual choice. So if you know in your heart that you don't need it, then walk away. I am quite good at walking away. I don't often just make a completely rash purchase that I regret. I've got a couple of things, but they're not generally expensive. So near to me, there's a market, and there's a chap there. Again, I think he gets his fabrics from small factories and workrooms. So the things that he has he only has sort of 4 or 5 meters, maybe a little more sometimes. But I've had some terrific fabrics from him, really interesting prints on them, decent quality, and you can feel them. That's a whole new area that's opening up, is a bricks and mortar shop over online.
We've had people on our podcast who have also said when they do online shopping, they get swatches. But then the issue there with swatches is by the time they end up making the purchase, the fabric's gone.
Have they sold out? That is a tricky one. And I would always suggest, if possible, to get a swatch. That said, I don't tend to do it. But then I don't buy that much online. I do blog on behalf of a fabric company here in the UK. Yeah. And the reason I'm happy to do that is because I have seen them at a couple of shows. So I've seen the fabrics at that time anyway, because obviously there's new stock coming all the time. I've seen the quality of the fabrics that they have, and I like the quality of what I saw then, and I know that the fabrics that they have online are of good quality. They're just a husband and wife team, and they're so involved in the sewing community. They want the customer to be happy. They are very much about pleasing their clientele. When it comes to online shopping, as you say, there's a lot of companies now setting up, small companies setting up, selling fabric. It's hard to be, I don't want to be critical at all, because it's a terrific way of people, very often women, setting up and running their own business in a way that works for them. They can work from home, they've often got small children, and they can run it alongside full-time work of some other kind completely. So it's terrific that we as a community can support these small online shops. And I gravitate towards the ones that, first of all, have the sort of fabrics that I like, the designs that I like to see. And then when I know what the quality of their fabric is like, then I'm happy to support them and to promote them. I don't get paid for it, but I do get provided with the fabric that I make the garments with. And I'm happy to do that. I make no apology for that, because they're quality fabrics.
And you get the freedom to be able to make something that you will wear and that you will be happy to wear.
Yes, that's a really nice position to be in. They also have quite a wide team of people, which is another reason I like being part of the team for that company, because they've got quite a broad base of experience and ages and interests and likes and dislikes in fabric. So their blogging team is diverse, which I think matters.
Yeah.
Because it comes back again to the so over 50 issue, doesn't it? We want to see ourselves represented. And I do that's why I put myself out there. Because above all, I love sewing and dressmaking, and I love communicating that with other people and wanting to share the stuff I've learned. Because if I can prevent someone having an expensive disaster, then I would love to be able to do that. I want to be a critical friend, not just critical.
Yeah.
And that can be very difficult with online. I know it can. But I still love a bricks and mortar shop, and I'm sure many people do, because you'll get a level of support in a shop. Often they're run by a person or people who've had that shop for decades, and it must be really tough for them right now, particularly if they don't have an online arm to the business.
It's really lovely when you go to a retailer, fabric retailer, and it is family, and you know, you've known them for so long. And I'm still really thankful that the family that run Minerva still allow me to do my monthly commitments, so I have no problems with that. Yeah.
How long have they been running? Do you know?
It was Vicky's mother who bought it, because I think she was working there, so it's been handed from mother to daughter.
Okay.
I went there when I first started blogging for them, and I met the whole family and all the people who work there. It's huge, but it's still a family company. Yeah.
That really matters, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really matters. Because I blogged for them as well. Not as often as you, but the email is always from Vicky. It's always, and she replies personally. Although you get the group email, she then always replies personally, doesn't she? And you can feel like you're having a conversation with someone. And to me, that really matters. It's not a faceless big company.
Yeah. When there have been instances that have happened locally that we hear about in Australia, I'll actually send a note to Vicky saying, are you guys okay? And she'll respond straight back. So that relationship is there, and I'm happy to keep it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I'm fortunate in being close to London, obviously. I've got a wealth of shops and markets that I can go to, and they're great. But because not everybody has that, you know, particularly
That's right.
Australia, for example. You could be hundreds and hundreds of miles from the nearest shop of any kind, never mind a fabric shop. So online is the only option for people. So I'm not going to knock it in that respect, because it really serves a purpose. It enables people to continue sewing and dressmaking in a way they wouldn't have been able to in the past. They would have just had to wait until the next time they went to the big city, presumably, to buy everything they needed then. And then that was that. You know, we were sport with the luxury of being able to get on the laptop, tip-tap, and order what we require, trims and things, and then it all just arrives. So there is a place for it, and it's not going away.
No.
But it's just different. It's just different. But I do hope that bricks and mortar shops are able to continue as well, because nothing beats going in and feeling the cloth and chatting with the people that are in the shop.
And I think the key thing that came out of the post that went up and your blog post about purchasing is that within the Sober 50 account and the people who follow it, there's a wealth of people who follow it who can give you advice if you want advice. And I think that's, again, one of the beauties of being involved with a Sober 50 account.
Yes, definitely, because I'm always still learning things from my friends on there as well. So I wouldn't want anyone thinking, oh, she knows it all, because I absolutely don't. My area of expertise is quite different to some other people. I've hardly done any tailoring, for example, over my life, my career. So that to me is very much finding my way. But the difference is probably that because I've had a lot of other experience, I know what techniques I can probably bring into play.
Yes.
To enable a decent result. It won't be a complete disaster. So you're learning all the time. We're always learning. And I'm not afraid to ask the questions if I'm struggling with something. Or I'll just see someone else has done it a new way, a different way, and think, oh, actually, I'll try that.
Exactly. Yeah,
and
exactly.
I've got new techniques that my needlework teacher would have a fit if she knew I did some of the things that I do now. but they work. They mean you can speed things up, or you just get a better result, or it's more pleasing, whatever. So you're always building and learning, and I'm really keen to do that.
And it's good to be, as I've said, it's good that if you're getting involved and if you're contributing to the So Over 50 account, you can pick all that up. And you don't have to be next to each other, because you can DM each other and get involved in the conversations.
Yeah, very much so.
Susan, we've covered so much already with your blog post, and we've barely touched the depth of your blog posts. So how about we continue on next week and talk about the rest of your blog post?
That sounds good to me. Yep, I can do that. I can talk about fabric for as long as you like.
Wonderful. So thank you again for being on So Organised Style So Over 50 Daily Podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Look, always happy to have you, Susan. You know that. So have a lovely day, listeners. Bye.
Bye.
This episode of So Over 50 Podcast on So Organised Style was produced by me, Maria Theoharis, with permission of Susan Young, sound by bensound.com. Many thanks for the ongoing support of this podcast Patreon contributors. Their ongoing monthly support enables me to develop this podcast for free. Make sure you direct message Sandy and the social media editors at So Over 50 on Instagram to contribute to the ongoing posts and challenges the team promotes to the community of over 50,000 followers. You can subscribe to So Organised Style Podcast, spelt with an S, not a Z, on all good podcast apps. Make sure you go back and listen to our free So Over 50 podcast archive from So Organised Style Podcast. We look forward to joining you in your sewing room next time. Stay safe, everyone.